Chioma had always believed that friendship was the one constant in a world full of variables. She met Adana during her first week at the University of Lagos, when she'd accidentally walked into the wrong lecture hall and sat through 40 minutes of a mechanical engineering class before realizing her mistake. Adana, 2 years her senior and already navigating campus life with the confidence of someone who knew where all the best Booker spots were, had laughed so hard she nearly choked on her gala. You sat through Professor Okonkwo's thermodynamics lecture, the man who makes paint drying look exciting? From that moment, they were inseparable. The kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, shared clothes without asking, and could communicate entire conversations with just a look across a crowded room. Adana was the sister Chioma never had, the person who held her hair back during fresher year's regrettable experimentation with ogogoro, the one who knew exactly how much sugar she took in her tea, and that she couldn't sleep without her childhood stuffed rabbit, even at 23. When Chioma met Emeka at a friend's birthday party in her second year, Adana was the first person she texted, fingers flying across her cracked phone screen at 2 a.m. Met a man today. A real man. Not these boys where they form. He gets sense, he get money. And sister, the way he looked at me, Emeka was everything the campus boys went. 29 to her 22, with a consulting job that actually paid real money, not just promises and vibes. He wore cologne that probably cost more than her semester's textbooks, drove a clean Honda Accord that he actually owned. No uncle's car, no my mechanic is still working on it. And when he spoke about his 5-year plan, it included things like investment portfolio and property acquisition, not just graduate and see what happens. Their first 3 months were the kind of whirlwind that made Chioma's roommates jealous. Weekend trips to La Campagne Tropicana, surprise deliveries of her favorite Chicken Republic meals during exam period, and the kind of attention that made her feel like she was the only woman in Lagos. But Emeka's love language was provision, and 6 months in, he did what he thought any man serious about his woman should do. He rented her a proper 1-bedroom flat in Yaba. Nothing too flashy, but clean, secure, and hers. The guilt hit Chioma immediately. Not about accepting the apartment. Her parents had raised her to recognize a blessing when it showed up. But about Adana, who was still squeezing into a room with 3 other girls in a hostel where the generator worked on its own schedule and the water ran on prayer and fasting. "I beg, you fit move in with me," Chioma had said, barely an hour after collecting the keys, her mind already made up before the words left her mouth. Adana's eyes widened, then filled with tears that she tried to blink away. "Chichi, are you sure? What will Emeka say?" But Emeka, generous Emeka, practical Emeka, had just shrugged when Chioma asked him, "If it makes you happy, why not? Plus, you ladies can keep each other company when I'm traveling for work. Just make sure somebody is actually paying attention to security in that place." And just like that, their duo became a trio. Adana moved in with 2 Ghana Must Go bags, a standing fan that made concerning noises, and gratitude so profound it poured out in home-cooked meals, cleaned apartments, and an eagerness to make herself useful that Chioma found both touching and, if she was honest, sometimes a little much. But this was her sister, her person, and what was the point of blessings if you couldn't share them? Before we continue, do tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far the stories reach. If you're from TikTok, the full video is already posted on YouTube. Enjoy! The arrangement worked beautifully at first, like a well-oiled machine designed by someone who hadn't considered that machines could rust. Chioma would wake up to find breakfast already made. Adana had a gift for turning the simplest ingredients into something that tasted like home, like their mother's kitchens, like comfort itself. The flat stayed cleaner than it ever had when Chioma lived alone, which wasn't saying much considering Chioma's idea of cleaning was shoving everything into the wardrobe and closing the door quickly. Emeka seemed pleased with the arrangement too, often joking that he now had 2 women to keep him in check, though the joke always landed slightly wrong, hovering in the air a bit too long before everyone laughed. He started bringing extra takeout when he visited, always remembering that Adana preferred jollof to fried rice, that she didn't eat snails, that she took her Chapman with extra grenadine. After all, he'd say, handing over the packages with that easy smile of his, "Adana is family na, Abi. My wife's sister is my sister." The word wife always made Chioma's stomach flutter, even though they'd never actually discussed marriage. Not seriously, anyway. What started as thoughtful consideration gradually morphed into something else entirely, something none of them seemed willing to name or address. When Emeka suggested a Saturday movie at Silverbird, Adana came. When he surprised Chioma with dinner at Ocean Basket, somehow it became a table for three. Club hopping on Friday nights, Adana was in the Uber, squeezed into the back seat, dressed to kill and smelling of the perfume Chioma had bought her for her birthday. At first, Chioma told herself she didn't mind. After all, what kind of friend would she be to leave Adana home alone while she went out enjoying herself? But late at night, when Emeka dropped them off and she lay in bed listening to Adana's soft snoring from the couch, Adana always insisted on the couch, even though Chioma offered to share the bed. A small, uncomfortable feeling would creep into her chest like smoke under a door. She couldn't quite name it. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more like a vague sense that boundaries that should exist had somehow dissolved without anyone noticing. But then morning would come, Adana would make her favorite akamu with all the right spices, and the feeling would disappear like morning mist under Lagos sun. Their campus friends started making jokes, the kind that cut even when delivered with laughter. Chioma, I greet you and your co-wife, her coursemate Ngozi said one day at the cafeteria, and everyone at the table exploded with laughter while Chioma's smile froze on her face. You people are not serious, she responded, waving her hand dismissively, but the comment lodged itself somewhere in her mind like a splinter too small to remove but too irritating to ignore. Even Emeka's friends weren't immune to the oddness of the arrangement. Once, at a beach hangout, she'd overhitch one of them, Tunde, Emeka's friend from secondary school, muttered to another, Guy, this your setup confused me, oh. Now two girlfriends you get now, or waiting. Emeka had laughed it off, something about modern friendship and trust, but Chioma noticed he didn't exactly deny it either. Still, she pushed the discomfort down, buried it under layers of rationalization. Adana was her best friend, practically her sister. Emeka was generous and understanding. They were all adults who trusted each other. This was just how close friends operated in this generation. Anyone who had a problem with it was just jealous or old-fashioned. Besides, wasn't their bond proof that platonic love could exist, that men and women could be friends without drama? She held on to these thoughts like a shield, never examining too closely what she might be shielding herself from. The graduation ceremony at the University of Lagos was everything Chioma had dreamed of during those endless nights of studying. Those moments when she'd questioned whether her degree would ever materialize, or if she'd be stuck in academic purgatory forever. The sun blazed overhead as she and Adana stood in their black gowns, sweat trickling down their backs despite the early morning hour. Mortarboards perched at angles they'd practiced in the mirror the night before. They'd synchronized everything, walked across the stage one after the other. Adana first because her surname started with A, then Chioma, their names echoing through the speakers as their families screamed from the stands with that particular brand of Nigerian parents' pride that could probably be heard in neighboring states. That's my daughter. Chioma, we made it! Jesus, we made it! Her mother's voice carried over everyone else's, and Chioma felt tears prick her eyes even as she laughed. After 4 years of lectures, strikes, and the special kind of chaos that only Unilag could provide, they'd actually done it together. As they posed for photos, arms around each other, Chioma whispered, "We actually survived, Ada. Can you believe it?" And Adana squeezed her tight, whispering back, "Because we had each other, Chi, always." Emeka had outdone himself in a way that was both touching and slightly excessive, but that was Emeka. When he loved loudly. 2 massive cakes appeared, as if by magic, each one 3 tiers high, decorated with edible photographs of Chioma and Adana in their graduation gowns, their names scripted in elaborate icing that must have cost a fortune. One cake read, "Congratulations, Chioma, my queen," and the other, "Congratulations, Adana, our star." Chioma's family had raised eyebrows at the hour, but said nothing, too caught up in the celebration to interrogate pronouns. The party Emeka organized wasn't small either. He'd rented out a hall in Ikeja, hired a DJ who actually knew how to read a room, and invited everyone. Their classmates, his friends, both families, even some lecturers who showed up for the free food and stayed for the open bar. The way he moved through the crowd, one hand perpetually on Chioma's waist, the other occasionally guiding Adana forward to introduce her to someone, you'd think he was celebrating two girlfriends or perhaps two sisters he was equally proud of. "This is Adana, she's family," he kept saying, and people would nod with polite confusion, trying to work out the exact nature of this family tree. Chioma's uncle pulled her aside at one point, smelling of star beer and concern. "My daughter, this your friend. She no get her own boyfriend, her own people. Why should they follow una everywhere?" Chioma had laughed it off, kissed his cheek, told him he was thinking too much. But later, watching Emeka feed both of them cake during the photo session, both their mouths open like baby birds, while the photographer captured the moment, that splinter feeling returned, sharper this time. The 2 years after graduation passed in a blur of job applications, entry-level positions that paid peanuts but demanded your soul, and the slow, grinding realization that a degree was just a starting point, not a finish line. Chioma landed a job in a marketing firm in Victoria Island, the kind where you wore heels that destroyed your feet and smiled through meetings about brand synergy and consumer engagement matrices. Adana found work at a logistics company, something administrative that she never talked about much, and Chioma never pressed because she sensed Adana wasn't particularly happy there. But they were surviving. Adulting, paying bills. Well, Emeka covered most of the rent, but they contributed where they could, and building what Chioma hoped was a foundation for real life. Emeka's consulting business had grown. He'd taken on 2 partners and was traveling more, sometimes disappearing for weeks to Abuja or Port Harcourt for client meetings. During those absences, the flat felt both emptier and more peaceful. Just Chioma and Adana in their old rhythm, watching Nollywood movies and talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of Emeka's longer trips that Chioma started noticing small things she'd been too busy to see before. How Adana's face would light up when Emeka's name flashed on her phone. How she always knew his schedule better than Chioma did. How she'd started wearing her hair the way Emeka once mentioned he found attractive. But these observations floated through Chioma's mind like clouds, forming shapes she refused to fully recognize, dissolving before they could solidify into actual concern. Emeka's confession came on a Tuesday evening, which felt wrong somehow. Life-changing conversations should happen on weekends when you had time to process them, not on a work night when you still had a presentation to finish for Thursday. They were sitting in his car outside the flat, engine running for the air conditioning because Lagos heat didn't care about the gravity of your personal moments. "Chi, I'm tired," he'd said, and her first thought, embarrassingly, was that he wanted to break up, that after nearly 7 years together, he'd found someone younger, prettier, less complicated. But then he continued, his hand finding hers across the gear shift. "I'm tired of playing house. I'm tired of dating. Baby, I'm 34 now. I want to build something real. I want marriage. I want children. I want to come home to my own family, not just visit my girlfriend's apartment." His voice cracked slightly on the word girlfriend, like it had become too small a container for what he felt. Chioma's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the conversation she'd been half dreading, half hoping for since she was 23. But now, at 25, with a career barely started and a life that still felt like it was in the setup phase, the timing felt impossibly wrong. "I love you," he continued, squeezing her hand. "I've loved you since that party where you laughed so hard you snorted and then got embarrassed about snorting. I want you to be my wife. But I also need to know, are you ready for this, for all of it? Because I can't wait forever, Chi. I can't keep putting my life on pause." That night, Chioma couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling while Adana's breathing provided a steady soundtrack from the couch. At 2 a.m., she gave up, padding out to the living room and gently shaking her friend awake. "Ada, I need your advice, serious advice." Adana sat up immediately, alert in that way she always was when Chioma needed her, reaching for the lamp and squinting in the sudden brightness. Over 2 cups of Milo and a pack of digestive biscuits they demolished between them, Chioma laid it all out. Emeka's desire for marriage, for children, for a future that starts now rather than someday. "What do I do, Ada? Am I ready for this? Is 25 too young?"
She expected Adana to tell her to follow her heart, to remind her how much Emeka loved her, maybe even to squeal with excitement about being a bridesmaid. Instead, Adana's face grew serious, that older sister expression she wore when dispensing wisdom. Chi, listen to me carefully. You're only 25. 25. Your 20s are supposed to be for you, for growth, for mistakes, for figuring out who you are outside of someone else's dreams. Children, marriage, that's forever. Once you start, you can't press pause. You can't take it back. She leaned forward, gripping Chioma's hands. I've watched you build your career, watched you become this amazing woman. Don't let anyone, not even Emeka, rush you into a life you're not ready for. There's time. If he really loves you, he'll wait. And if he won't wait, she paused, something flickering across her face too quickly to read. Then maybe he's not the one. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread through Chioma's resolve until by morning she'd made her decision. Emeka took the news better than Chioma expected, though she could see the disappointment settle into the lines around his eyes, aging him 5 years in 5 seconds. I respect your decision, he'd said, voice carefully neutral in that way men get when they're trying to not show their hurt. I hoped we were on the same page, that's all. But I understand, you're young, you have time. The phrase "you have time" hung between them like an accusation, and Chioma wanted to take it back, to say yes, let's do it, let's have a baby and build this life you're dreaming of. But Adana's words echoed in her head. Once you start, you can't take it back. So instead, she kissed him, told him she loved him, promised they'd revisit the conversation in a year, maybe 2. He nodded, smiled, held her like he was memorizing the feel of her, and then he left earlier than usual, claiming an early morning meeting. That night, Chioma made her favorite egusi soup without being asked, let her cry even though Chioma wasn't entirely sure what she was crying about, and reminded her that she'd made the right choice, that her future self would thank her. You did good, Chi, Adana whispered, stroking her hair like a mother comforting a child. Trust me, you did good. And Chioma, exhausted from emotion and indecision, chose to believe her, chose to trust the one person who'd never steered her wrong, chose to ignore the tiny voice in her head asking why Adana seemed almost relieved.
The emergency came 3 months later, in the form of a phone call at 6 a.m. Chioma's mother's voice frantic and crackling through poor network reception. Your grandmother fell. We're at the hospital. You need to come home now. Chioma was on a bus to her village in Anambra by noon, having barely packed, her mind racing with worry and worst-case scenarios that her mother's vague updates did nothing to calm. The plan was to stay 2, maybe 3 days, just long enough to see her grandmother stable, to pray with the family, to fulfill the obligations of a good granddaughter. She'd called Emeka from the bus park, shouting over the noise of touts and engines, and he'd promised to check on the flat to make sure Adana was okay. Don't worry about anything here, he said. Just focus on your family. I'll handle everything. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Proof that despite their recent tension about children and timelines, he was still her person, still the man who showed up when it mattered. She texted Adana too. Emergency, had to travel. We'll explain later. Take care of yourself. Love you. The response came quickly. Oh no, praying for grandma. Travel safe. Don't worry about anything here. And just like that, Chioma was gone, leaving Lagos and its complications behind for the slower, quieter crisis of family and mortality. 4 days into her village stay, with her grandmother finally stable and Chioma beginning to think about returning to Lagos, her phone buzzed with Adana's name. Chi, please, I need your help. There's this party, my former classmate from campus. She's getting married and she asked me to help bring food, like proper party food, not small chops. And you know I don't drive, and the venue is all the way in Lekki. And she paused, and Chioma could hear the hesitation, the careful way she was constructing her request. I was thinking maybe I could go with Emeka just for the ride there and back. I know it's awkward to ask, but I already told my friend I would help and I don't want to disappoint her. And Chioma cut her off, laughing despite her exhaustion. Ada, relax. It's fine. Emeka is practically your brother at this point, Abi. Just ask him to drop you. It's not a big deal. The relief in Adana's voice was palpable, gushing thanks and blessings until Chioma had to end the call because her phone battery was dying and the village had decided that electricity was optional that week. Later, she'd remember that conversation, would replay it in her head during the sleepless nights that followed, wondering if some part of her had known, if intuition had tried to warn her and she'd been too tired, too trusting, too convinced of her friend's loyalty to listen. What Chioma didn't know, what she couldn't know because she was 200 kilometers away holding her grandmother's hand and listening to old stories about ancestors and family obligations, was that there was no party. Or rather, there was a party, but Adana had never been asked to bring food, had never planned to help with anything. The party was just a story, carefully constructed, plausible enough that Chioma wouldn't question it, because why would she? Why would anyone question their best friend, their sister, the person who'd shared their life for 7 years? That Saturday night, while Chioma slept on a thin mattress in her grandmother's room, Adana got dressed in the outfit she'd bought specifically for this. Not too sexy, but not too modest either. The kind of dress that said, "I'm not trying too hard," while trying extremely hard. She'd practiced her makeup 3 times, settling on a look that made her eyes bigger, her lips fuller, her intentions invisible. When Emeka picked her up, she suggested they grab drinks first, since the party didn't start until late. 1 drink became 3, 3 became shots, and somewhere between the DJ playing Burna Boy and the way Emeka's laugh sounded without Chioma there to complete their trio, boundaries that were already thin began to dissolve completely. They never made it to any party. They made it to his place instead, to his bed, to a betrayal so complete that when morning came and sobriety crashed over them like cold water, all they could do was stare at each other in horror at what they'd done, at what they'd broken, at the secret they'd now have to carry or confess. The agreement they made in Emeka's bedroom, with dawn light creeping through curtains and shame settling into their bones like radiation, was simple. They would never speak of it again. It was a mistake, Emeka said, his voice hoarse, not quite meeting Adana's eyes. We were drunk. We weren't thinking. This can never happen again, and Chi can never know. It would destroy her. Adana nodded so vigorously her neck hurt, relief and guilt warring across her face. Never again. We pretend it didn't happen. For Chi's sake, she can't ever find out. They shook on it like business partners closing a deal, ignoring how ridiculous that gesture was given what they'd just done. And then Adana gathered her things and called an Uber, leaving before the neighbors could see her doing the walk of shame from a man who wasn't supposed to be hers. The ride back to the flat felt like the longest journey of her life. Every traffic light an accusation, every Okada that zipped past a witness to her betrayal. When she finally made it home, she showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing her skin like she could wash away what she'd done, then crawled onto the couch and cried into the same pillow where Chioma had cried 3 months ago about not being ready for children. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood, and maybe that's what the pain in her chest was, her conscience finally learning to cut. Chioma returned to Lagos 5 days later, exhausted but relieved, her grandmother stable, and her family obligations fulfilled. The flat looked exactly as she'd left it, maybe cleaner. Adana had clearly stress cleaned, which she did when anxious, every surface gleaming like evidence being wiped away. "I missed you so much," Adana said, hugging her so tight Chioma could barely breathe. And something in the desperation of that embrace felt off, too intense, too needy. But Chioma was tired, and her brain attributed it to worry, to the natural anxiety of being apart. Emeka came by that evening with her favorite pounded yam from Mama Cass, and everything seemed normal. He kissed her hello, asked about her grandmother, made jokes about village life and mosquitoes. If Chioma noticed that he and Adana barely looked at each other, that they moved around the room like magnets with matching poles, forced apart by physics and guilt, she didn't mention it. In fact, she was grateful for the space, interpreting their distance as respect for her relationship, proof that all her friends' warnings about their weird arrangement had been wrong. Look at them, she thought, watching Emeka serve food while Adana set the table, both of them so careful not to touch, not to create any hint of impropriety. This is what mature friendship looks like. This is what trust builds. She actually felt proud of them, of their boundary-respecting behavior, having no idea that the boundaries had already been crossed, burned down, and buried where she'd never find them. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong came 6 weeks later, when Adana started vomiting. It began as morning nausea that Chioma initially dismissed as bad food. That malam shawarma finally catching up with you, Abi? But when it continued for days, then a week, then 2 weeks, concern replaced teasing. Ada, you need to see a doctor. This isn't normal. Adana kept making excuses. She was fine. It was just stress. Her period was coming and always made her sick. She'd take some Andrews and it would pass. But the vomiting got worse, joined by fatigue so profound that Adana could barely make it through work, coming home to collapse on the couch like someone had unplugged her. Finally, Chioma put her foot down, dragging Adana to a pharmacy for a pregnancy test because the signs were too obvious to ignore, even though Adana kept insisting it was impossible. She hadn't been with anyone. There was no way. The test took 3 minutes to process but felt like 3 hours, both of them staring at it like it was a bomb about to detonate. When the 2 lines appeared, clear and damning and irrefutable, the air left the room. Adana's face went grey, then green, and she ran to the bathroom to vomit again, this time from panic rather than pregnancy hormones. Chioma stood frozen, mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there was someone Adana hadn't mentioned, some guy she'd hooked up with and regretted, some party hookup during one of those nights when Chioma had been too tired to go out. It never occurred to her, not for a single second, that the father might be someone she knew, someone she loved, someone who was supposed to be hers. The truth came out in pieces, extracted like shrapnel from a wound, each revelation more painful than the last. Adana told Emeka first, calling him in a panic from the bathroom floor, where she'd been crying for 20 minutes, while Chioma paced outside the door asking if she was okay. "I'm pregnant," she'd whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. "It's yours. From that night. What are we going to do?" And Emeka, who should have felt horror, who should have felt the weight of his betrayal crushing him, felt something else entirely. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, overwhelming joy. The baby he'd wanted for years, the child Chioma had said no to, was now growing in another woman's womb, and his brain, operating on some primal frequency that had nothing to do with morality or loyalty, registered only, "I'm going to be a father." "I'll handle it," he told Adana, and there was something in his voice, some certainty that terrified her more than his anger would have. "Don't tell Chioma yet. Let me figure this out." But figuring it out, in Emeka's mind, didn't mean damage control or finding a way to minimize the hurt. It meant making a choice, the kind of choice that revealed who he'd always been underneath the generous gestures and the patient waiting, a man who wanted what he wanted and who would take it from wherever it was offered. The breakup happened on a Sunday, which felt like a desecration of the day of rest, though Chioma would later think that nothing about that conversation deserved peace. Emeka arrived at the flat unannounced, his face set in that expression men get when they've already made a decision and are just going through the motions of announcing it. "We need to talk. Alone." Adana, who'd been pretending to nap on the couch, suddenly needed to visit a friend, grabbing her bag and fleeing so fast she forgot her phone, which should have been Chioma's first clue that something was coordinated, rehearsed. "I'm ending things," Emeka said. And Chioma laughed because surely this was a joke. Surely after 7 years, he wasn't breaking up with her in her own living room on a Sunday afternoon with no preamble, no explanation. But his face didn't change, and the laughter died in her throat like a plant with cut roots. "Why?" she managed, and he gave her the sanitized version, the version where he was the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of betrayal. Adana was pregnant, they'd made a mistake one night, he hadn't meant for it to happen, but now that it had, he needed to do the right thing. "The right thing?" Chioma repeated, her voice climbing octaves she didn't know she could reach. "The right thing would have been keeping your hands off my best friend. The right thing would have been remembering you had a girlfriend. The right thing..." But he cut her off. And this is when she saw who he really was, when the mask finally fell completely. She's giving me what you wouldn't. A child, a family. I'm 34 years old, Chio. I can't keep waiting for you to be ready when someone else already is. The months that followed were a masterclass in how betrayal doesn't kill you cleanly, but instead dismantles you piece by piece, system by system, until you're still technically alive, but not sure what for. Adana moved out immediately, or rather, Emeka moved her out into his own apartment, where she could be properly cared for during the pregnancy, where morning sickness could be attended to by the man who caused it. Chioma heard through mutual friends, because of course they were mutual friends, 7 years of relationship didn't disappear just because the relationship did, that he'd introduced Adana to his family within a month. That his mother, who'd never quite warmed to Chioma, apparently loved Adana, thought she was respectful and humble and perfect for her son. The dowry negotiations started, traditional marriage plans were made, and Chioma watched it all unfold through social media posts she couldn't stop checking, even though each one felt like swallowing glass. There was Adana, glowing in maternity wear, her hand on her growing belly, Emeka's arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like they'd won something rather than stolen it. The comment section was full of congratulations, blessings, people who had no idea they were celebrating a betrayal so profound it had reshaped 3 lives entirely. Chioma's friends urged her to block them, to delete social media, to move on. But she couldn't look away, trapped in the specific torture of watching the life she had refused being lived by the person she had trusted most. Depression crept in quietly at first, masquerading as exhaustion, as reasonable sadness, as the natural aftermath of heartbreak. But then it settled in like a tenant who decided to stay, turning days into obligations she could barely meet and nights into endless loops of the same questions. How did she not see it? What signs had she missed? If she had said yes to the baby, would Emeka still be hers? Was it her fault for trusting too much, for blurring boundaries, for bringing a viper into her home and calling her sister? Her performance at work deteriorated. She missed deadlines, zoned out in meetings, stopped caring about brand synergy or consumer engagement or any of the corporate language that suddenly seemed meaningless when your entire life had been revealed as fiction. Her mother called weakly, her voice tight with worry. Chioma, you need to snap out of this. They were not worthy of you. Dust yourself off and move forward. But moving forward required energy she didn't have, faith in people she'd lost, and a belief in happy endings that had been beaten out of her by reality's insistence on teaching lessons through suffering. On her worst days, she thought about the party that never was, about how easily she'd given permission for her own destruction, about how she actually felt proud of their mature friendship while they were planning her replacement. The invitation to the wedding arrived in her mailbox 3 months ago, because of course they'd invited her, because people who could do what they did apparently had no shame left to spare. And Chioma held it in her hands for a full hour, before finally ripping it into pieces so small that they looked like confetti for a celebration in hell where she increasingly felt she already lived. So there you have it, a story of trust destroyed, friendship betrayed, and love stolen. But here's my question for you. If you were Chioma's friend, what advice would you give her right now? Should she move on, get revenge, or something else entirely? Drop your answers in the comments and make sure you're subscribed because stories like this deserve to be shared. Tag someone who needs to hear this cautionary tale about boundaries and betrayal.